Tatooine is one of the most well-known planets in Star Wars, and one Star Wars likes to revisit time and time again. It's a world defined by many things, and among them are the SANDCRAWLERS, the iconic mobile clan homes of the Jawas. These huge treaded vehicles played a major role in establishing the Star Wars universe as a place with history, giving it a sense of use that has become a beloved aesthetic of the franchise. But while the SANDCRAWLER is familiar to your average Star Wars fan, it's got history to it that's much less well known. The Jawas didn't build these behemoths, for starters. They were brought to Tatooine by outsiders, and they've defined most of its history with galactic civilization. In this video, we'll be explaining why.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
The Tatoo system was located along the old Corellian Run, and it was charted fairly early in the Republic's history. But the system's sole habitable world, Tatooine, wasn't recognized as a planet for over 10,000 years. The desert world gleamed so brightly that it was erroneously believed it was just a third star with an eccentric orbit around Tatoo 1 and 2. Over the years, many groups realized this was a misconception and sought to lay claim to Tatooine. The planet's first known Republic-era contact with the outside galaxy came in 5000 BBY, when there was a massive space battle above the planet that littered the planet with debris. Many other ships crashed on Tatooine over the years, and in the 4000s BBY, several groups attempted long-term settlement on the planet. Most of these bands of settlers only stuck around for a few decades before abandoning the planet, and the names of many of them are unknown. The earliest known was Czerka Corporation, which built the town of Anchorhead on Tatooine and sought to exploit the planet for resources. Anchorhead, they suspected, had been settled several times in the past, but they could find little trace of the earlier settlers, and they didn't care much about Tatooine's history in any event. They were there to make a profit, and they wanted to do so by mining the planet. Their initial surveys of Tatooine had found it to be rich in a variety of metals, and Czerka hoped to make a fortune ripping them out of the planet's crust. That was the original purpose of the SANDCRAWLERS. They were mining vehicles brought to Tatooine by Czerka. During Czerka's time on the planet, they drove between the corporation's mines out in the Dune Sea, tearing up the desert in search of valuable ore, which the SANDCRAWLERS were also equipped to process and then safely shuttle home to Anchorhead. It was a simple business plan, but it went awry almost immediately. Czerka's first problem was that they weren't the only ones on Tatooine, and while the indigenous Jawas didn't make much issue with the company and traded with the settlers in Anchorhead, the Sand People weren't nearly as accommodating. The Sand People detested outsiders as a result of their ancestors' experience with the Rakata and their infinite empire. But Czerka's SANDCRAWLERS added insult to injury. The Sand People's cultural values were based around connection to and respect for the land. Czerka's SANDCRAWLERS roaming around their territory, ripping up the sand, was not only an insult to them, but to their very culture and the planet they held dear. The chieftains of the Sand People saw it as an act of war, and they and their warriors responded to Czerka in kind, launching devastating attacks on the corporation's mines and SANDCRAWLER convoys. But to make all this even worse, Tatooine wasn't even good for mining in the first place. To quote a SANDCRAWLER mechanic from Knights of the Old Republic, "Tatooine fools people. It looks like it might have a good supply of resources, but it doesn't. Before a company learns this, they've already set up communities to support operations they now can't afford. Company pulls out, cities dry up, and after a few years, someone that doesn't even know why it failed tries again. I guess it looked like a promising mining planet, but the metal. I tell you, it just isn't right. I've been a mechanic my whole life, and I've never seen anything corrode as fast as Tatooine metal. It's why whoever was here before left, and why Czerka will leave, and why whoever comes next will leave as well." Everything Czerka mined from Tatooine was junk. The whole settlement initiative was a waste of time and money. The same, they realized, has been true for the previous waves of settlers, which was why they left. Czerka was eventually forced to abandon Tatooine altogether, leaving Anchorhead to be buried in the Dune Sea. The SANDCRAWLERS were left behind, and they were commandeered by the Jawas. That said, the SANDCRAWLERS we know from the films weren't the only ones left behind by Czerka. After Czerka pulled out, Tatooine didn't see any more settlers for thousands of years, and the galaxy forgot about the planet until it was rediscovered during the Republic's final centuries. The wave of settlers we know from the films only came to Tatooine in 100 BBY, though they were preceded by several centuries by bands of outlaws and criminals. These settlers weren't miners, but a few years after they established themselves, they were joined on Tatooine by the Corellian Mining Corporation, which brought in more SANDCRAWLERS and repeated Czerka's mistakes. But they too pulled out in 70 BBY, again leaving behind their SANDCRAWLERS, which the Jawas also commandeered. The Corellian SANDCRAWLERS are the ones we know from the films. The CMC Digger crawlers used by the Jawas at the time of the films were powered by old-fashioned nuclear reactors, which both generated power for the SANDCRAWLER and provided heat for use in ore processing. These reactors were located in the rear of the craft, near the SANDCRAWLER's backup power cells. The SANDCRAWLERs were propelled by 4 sets of drive treads, which, while sluggish, were reliable and well-suited to the Dune Sea. These treads supported a huge block-like main body covered in dense layers of armor plating, which kept out sand and sand people alike. Most of the main body of the SANDCRAWLER was given over to its ore processing equipment, which the Jawas used to process scrap instead. For small finds like droids or individual ship components, the Jawas used a repulsor lift tube adjacent to the port and starboard entry hatches to ferry them to the SANDCRAWLER's processing facilities. For larger finds, the Jawas would open the SANDCRAWLER's massive forward hatch, allowing them to deploy salvage cranes to haul the wreckage into the SANDCRAWLER's depths. Droids were brought to the lower level of the SANDCRAWLER, where the Jawas repaired and stored them, while scrap was brought into the main hold, where the Jawas sorted it with a system of magnetic cranes and conveyors. The stuff that the Jawas thought they could repair or recycle was processed in the main hold itself, while the stuff the Jawas wanted to scrap was piled into elevators, which hauled it up to the SANDCRAWLER's ore processors located between the main hold and the reactor. The Jawas used the SANDCRAWLER's mining equipment to break scrap down into ingots of usable metal. Laser preprocessors cut the scrap down into manageable pieces, which ore crushers and drill grinders pulverized, and the main reactor melted into slag. Ingots of usable metal would then be extracted from the slag, the remainder of which was dumped. Only the uppermost levels of the SANDCRAWLER were actually used for habitation. CMC SANDCRAWLERS were designed to be operated by a crew of 50, but Jawa clans packed as many as 300 people onto these vast machines, cramming 6 Jawas into quarters meant for a single human, which themselves were barely larger than closets. The living quarters at the top of the SANDCRAWLER were thus packed to the brim. The only orderly parts of the entire vehicle was the command section at the front of the SANDCRAWLER, divided between the navigation tracking room and the control room from which the SANDCRAWLER was piloted. SANDCRAWLERS radically changed the shape of the Jawas' civilization. Before Czerka came to Tatooine, the Jawas were held in contempt and often held as slaves by the Sand People. The cause of the enmity between the two peoples is unclear, but it's implied to have been due to the Jawas' fascination with the wrecked starships that littered the desert and the alien technology they contained. The Sand People extended their hatred of outsiders to the outsiders' technology, with only a handful of exceptions, and they thus extended this hatred to the Jawas for their fascination with it. This hatred only intensified after the Jawas began trading with the Anchorhead settlers, which of course only drove the Jawas to associate more with the settlers, preferring them to the Sand People. During the long chunks of time between settler waves, the Jawas were generally at the mercy of the Sand People, and only when they could rely on settlers for protection did their conditions improve. But the SANDCRAWLERS changed that. A single SANDCRAWLER could become a mobile home for an entire Jawa clan, heavily armored and well suited to scavenging and recycling wreckage and discarded technology, which the Jawas sold to the settlers. SANDCRAWLERS were tough enough to be able to withstand Sand People attacks and even angry Krayt dragons, and the Jawas rebuilt their whole culture around them. SANDCRAWLERS became representative of the Jawa clans, small independent communities that only occasionally gathered at the Jawas' mountain fortress. But while the Sandcrawlers were salvation for the Jawas, to the Sand People they symbolized their blood feud with the settlers. The Sandcrawlers represented the desecrations of the outsiders, the conflicts with Zerka that had started the war in the first place, and the Jawas' use of them only riled the Sand People up further. And to the settlers, the Sandcrawlers were a reminder that Tatooine was unfriendly to their kind. Many like them had been beaten by the desert, leaving behind only weathered machines for the Jawas or the next wave of settlers to find. So, that's our look at the Sandcrawlers, the iconic clan vehicles of the Jawas. But what do you think? Are there other Star Wars vehicles you'd like us to explore the history of? Feel free to post your thoughts in the comment section below.